But feel free to purchase them from me today if you really wish, or you can borrow them from the library, that's fine too. So this story opens basically on a man in the forest who has no idea how he got there or what's been happening. Pain. He groaned and rolled over. He was lying in a drift of leaves. You could feel them all up and down his body, so unless they were remarkably penetrative leaves, he must have been naked. He tried groaning again, but it echoed painfully in his head, so he just tried lying there. For the moment, it seemed quiet and peaceful, and he really enjoyed his pain, with nothing to distract him from it. For long moments, that's what happened. A tiny sound penetrated the pain. For a moment, it did not seem to mean much. A small snuffling sound like a rodent or a small burrowing creature. No, that was not it. Something like a child crying. A child alone in the woods and trying not to be heard. He forced himself to roll over to one side and to try and find the sound. It was somewhere nearby. Then came a scream, a young, high-pitched girl. He was on his feet and headed towards her before it dawned on him that he was holding a sword. It was dark as night, capturing the light rather than reflecting it. Still, it was a weapon, and going by that scream, he would need it. Worry about where it came from later. A moment later, a scene came into view. 4 men surrounded a young girl. She was hunched against a tree, trying to wield a tree branch that looked almost as big as she was. She was whimpering with fear, but was still fighting back. He felt a surge of respect for her. She looked about 4, long blonde hair and a tunic, grubby but clearly well made. There were no shoes on her feet, but her skin was soft and spoke of plenty of times where shoes were worn. A girl from a noble family then, not a serf. That might explain the attack. Not that it mattered. 4 men against a child was never justified. He gave a bellow and charged. As one of the men flicked around, surprised by the sight of a naked swordsman attacking, but there shouldn't have been anyone at all. Paralysis held them long enough for him to close the distance and cleave the nearest head from its shoulders. The moment broke in a flurry of swords and yells. He moved without thinking, spinning and carving until there was no one left. He stood for a moment, panting from the exertion and the pain still pulling at his limbs. The blood around him was stirring his fangs to life. He stood resting on his sword and fighting the hunger. He would not feed from the dead, especially not dead like these. Finally bringing himself under control, he turned to face the young girl. He crouched down, trying to see if she was hurt. She scrambled closer to the tree and heaved again at her tree branch. By some miracle, she managed to lift it high enough to make him swing back. He snatched it out of her hand and threw it away. "Give that back!" Her eyes flashed in defiance. He could not help it. The laugh bubbled up through him. "Or you'll do what?" She glanced around for another branch. Seeing nothing, she bit her lip. Then she seemed to come to a decision. "I will turn you into a frog." His eyes opened in surprise. "Really? And just how will you do that?" She stopped as if she had not even considered the mechanics. "I do not know. I suppose I would just want it very hard. After all, I wanted someone to protect me from the brigands, and I summoned you." He shrugged. Maybe she had. He could not remember anything else from before, but the few moments before he heard her crying. "It's worth a try, I suppose. But I do not think I would make a very good frog." She looked at him. "No, I suppose not." She gave a sigh. "Well, maybe I shall turn you into a pony. That way I'll be able to get home, if I knew which direction it was in." Her voice quavered as if she was going to cry again. "Perhaps you should, though I would have nowhere to keep my sword as a pony. Perhaps instead I should carry you on my shoulders. That would leave my hands free." She accepted that statement with a grave nod. Then she looked up at him. "And you are naked. A princess should not have a naked pony." The corners of his mouth twitched, but he returned the grave nod. I'm sure our departed companions here would have clothes that they do not need any longer. I could dress in them, Your Highness. She thought for a moment. Yes, that will do. It is not ideal, but we must make shift. She was so obviously quoting that he had to turn away before she saw him laugh. He began to strip the dead men of their weapons, clothes and money. Between the four of them, he was able to find a decent belt knife, a bow and a quiver of arrows. Clothing was too tight as he was much larger than them, but it would do for now. He could do nothing about the blood and other stains on it. Soon the little princess was riding his shoulders and pointing out directions. He was intrigued with the amount of knowledge she seemed to have about the local plants. Oh, my grandmother believes we should all know our way around the herbs, especially princesses. We may not be able to fight in every battle, but we have to help patch up every wounded soldier. Your grandmother sounds very wise. A sudden silence seemed to reign. Then in the smallest voice she whispered, my grandmother is dead. It was her funeral I was running away from. He took a deep breath. I see. Well, I am very sad I did not meet her. They walked along in silence for a moment and she said, I'm a princess, so you cannot have my name, but I should have yours. He grinned. Indeed you should. It is... He paused. Then he realised he had no idea who he was. There was no name nor any history to him. I cannot remember. He felt little hands search across his scalp. He could not see a bump. Sometimes a bump can lose memory. He shook his head. No, I felt bruised but not injured. Felt. She was quick, this one. He hesitated and then decided to tell her everything he could remember, which was precisely nothing from when he woke up in the leaves. She sat in silence for a moment after he finished and said, you must have very good hearing, and you're very strong. Yes, I suppose I am. And you're the quickest fighter I've ever seen. How many fighters have you seen? Oh, lots. I suppose it's my father's court now. Well, I see them practice all the time. I even join in practices for basic lessons. Father says you're never too young to start training. Really? Of course he does. Everyone does. Still, all this is not getting you a name. I shall have to call you something. Now, you do not have a title, so I suppose I shall have to make up a name. I will call you Tamal. Frown. Why Tamal? Because my grandmother told me stories of a demon long ago who had helped the first king settle this land, and that demon was called Tamal. So if I summoned you up, you must be a demon too. He stopped for a moment. And you are fine with me being a demon? He felt a shrug. Well, I suppose if I'm a witch, then I really cannot say that you can't be a demon. Besides, I saw your fangs, and that seemed to settle it for her. He had to admit it sounded reasonable. All right then, Tamal I am. Good, because we're almost home and I'll have to introduce you to the court. Tamal withheld judgment on that call. If she wanted to be a witch and princess, who was he to argue? After all, he was being a demon and a horse. They walked along in companionable silence, the princess only occasionally speaking to offer directions. Tamal had been backtracking her trail almost subconsciously and was sure they were heading in the right direction. As she calmed, her directions held true to the tracks he was following, so he picked up the pace. Voices began to sound through the trees. The princess groaned. Oh no, they're looking for me. I've ruined the funeral. Father will not be pleased. She called out and soon the voices were closer. Tamal considered dropping the girl to her feet, but considering his blood-stained appearance, thought the girl's presence might shield him from hasty decisions. Twigs snapped as the voices grew closer. They were obviously running and sounded very relieved. A heavy man in cleric's robes burst into view, followed closely by a smaller, much thinner man in the dress of a courtier, though in sombre black. The heavy-set man came running forward. Highness, are you all right? Tamal noticed the smaller man stand back, his hand on his sword. He strongly suspected the only reason he had not joined was because of the risk to the child. Obviously, she had not been telling fantasy tales. She really was a princess. So why was a child so young and so important in the woods alone? Still, it explained the attackers. They must have thought their ransom purses filled to the bursting at the sight of her. Princess nudged at him with her heels. "You may let me down now, Tamal." He caught her gently around the waist and swung her to the ground. He was surprised when she kept hold of his hand. Maybe she saw the suspicious glances of her carers as well. She led him forward. "I'm fine, Mashtak." The cleric dropped to his knees to examine her as if unwilling to take her word for it. She submitted to the prodding with patient grace. Finally, Mashtak seemed to be convinced that she was indeed all right. Only then did he turn to Tamal. "And who are you?" he boomed. The princess interrupted before he could reply. "Here's Tamal. I named him from the demon from the first king legend. He came when I summoned help. He does not know who he is, but he's quick and strong and took out 4 wolf riders at once." Mashtak eyed Tamal curiously. "Did he indeed? Well then, we owe him our thanks." The thin man snorted, assuming he did not set the whole attack up himself. Mashtak snorted again. "Always the optimist, though. I wonder you do not stay abed in the morning for fear of stepping on spiders." Lilong glared at his companion. "Still, he should be brought before the king." "Of course he should. We need something to be happy about. The princess returned, an attack thwarted. It will bring him out of himself. I shall summon the demon myself." "Can priests summon demons then?" asked the princess. "Interesting question, Highness. I suppose how do you define demon? If it's an evil spawn of the hells, I suppose I should not." "Are you?" Tamal was caught between laughing and frowning. "I do not feel evil, although I find a reluctance to say the word He paused and shrugged, leaving the word unfinished. Mashtak's gaze became thoughtful, and Tamal found himself wondering if he was to be prodded next. Thankfully, he was not. Instead, Mashtak continued lecturing on his topic. "If you define a demon as one who comes from a different plane from the ours, then I do not see why I cannot summon one more conscious." The Lord gave another snort. "Perhaps you have no ideas as to his abilities or powers, or what might it cost for his services, like, say, your soul." Tamal shrugged. "I cannot say I have much use for souls, other than my own." For some reason he felt for the sword. "As for my abilities, I think they are mostly unchanged, although I feel a strange power in this land, as if I could." He curled his fingers and pulled, as if on an invisible rope. The branch of a tree ripped forward. Surprised, Tamal stepped back and the tree came with him. All 4 of them stood in stunned silence as they looked at the felled tree. "Well," said Mashtak after a long pause, "I think we should refrain from any further attempts to find out your abilities until the princess is safely back home in the castle. He is out of it," muttered Threnon under his breath. Tamal said nothing. He had to admit he agreed with the Dow courtier. Next time he practiced his abilities, he wanted to be a long way from anything and anyone breakable. They started wandering back. Other searchers were obviously breaking off the search and heading home as well. The occasional glimpses of colour and voice from travellers either side were evidently mentioned. "I can think of another reason you probably should not summon a demon," the princess said. Mashtak bent an ear to her. "You arrived naked. I do not think it's really suitable for a cleric to have naked men around," the princess commented, and what Tamal had come to think of was her grandmother's voice. "Or princesses, for that matter," Mashtak replied back. She shrugged.